Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on building high-performance apps with Altinity Stable Builds for ClickHouse. My name is Robert Hodges, and I'll be one of the presenters today. I'm joined by my colleague, Vasily Nemkov. We're both from Altinity. Before we get further into the presentation, I'd like to just give you a little bit of information that will help you enjoy this presentation more. We're using Zoom webinars, so this has a couple of cool features. One is we are recording this webinar. You don't have to take frantic notes. We will send you a link to the recording, which will be posted up on YouTube within about 24 hours. We will also send you, along with that, a link to the slides. This is something that everybody who attends the webinar will receive. Second thing is we have a couple of different ways that you can ask questions on this topic. This webinar is not a terrifically long one, so we'll have plenty of time to answer questions if they do arise. You can either post them into the webinar chat, which everyone should have available off the Zoom menu bar, and there's also a question and answer box. We don't really care which place you put it. If we see your question, we will answer it. So with that, I'd like to dive in and we'll talk a little bit about us, first of all. So at Altinity, we're database geeks. Company is heavily engineering focused. We've been working on ClickHouse since 2017. In fact, many of us have used it longer than that. Overall, the company has centuries of experience in database and applications. I myself have been working on databases for about 40 years. In fact, this is a good time to introduce my colleague, Vasily Nemkov. Vasily, do you want to tell a little bit about your background?
Hi guys, my name is Vasily Nemkov. I'm a cell engineer team lead here at Altinity. I'm with Altinity since 2018 and I work in the database field since 2016. As Robert usually says, our goal is to make our customers happy. So I think, I see my responsibility with that regard as deliver features and fixes to make our customers happy.
Right, and Vasily has many dozens of PRs that he has submitted to ClickHouse and has helped drive the development of ClickHouse in critical areas like encryption, like security, like codecs, things like that. So for you in the audience, well, you're developers and business leaders looking to learn about real-time analytics and particularly to learn about how to manage builds, which as you'll see are really critical if you're maintaining large installations. Altinity as a whole, we are a service provider for ClickHouse. We first in the United States market, first to market also with Altinity.cloud, which is our cloud platform, runs in both Amazon cloud as well as Google. But we are more than just a cloud platform. Our goal is to enable you to run ClickHouse anywhere that you need to. And so we not only run in our cloud, we also give you the ability to just get support and run, for example, if you everything from your own racked hardware to your own cloud accounts to embedded software in appliances. We cover all of those. And we actually have our newest product is an extension of Altinity.cloud that will basically allow us to drill in and manage ClickHouse clusters anywhere that Kubernetes can run, including anywhere that you can set it up. We do a lot of open source work. We'll talk about that. ClickHouse is, of course, a big part of that. We're also authors of the Altinity Kubernetes operator for ClickHouse. If you're a cloud native Kubernetes person, you've almost certainly heard about it. So that's enough about us. Let's dive in and talk a little bit about ClickHouse. So I'd like to just give a little bit of background on ClickHouse in case you are not familiar with it. ClickHouse is an analytic database. It is particularly well suited for real-time analytics, by which we mean analytics or use cases where data is arriving very rapidly, often millions or tens of millions of rows per second, where you need to respond to that rapidly arriving data quickly, and also have the ability to do deeper analysis, for example, slicing and dicing queries, not just on the newly arriving data, but data in some cases going back for years and spanning petabytes in some cases of data that you're moving through to understand what's going on in your business. Some of the characteristics that make ClickHouse particularly well suited for that: it understands SQL. It runs practically anywhere. You can literally run it on an Android phone. There was an article about that a few years back, but it runs really well on bare metal. It can run in Kubernetes. It can run in cloud environments. It's very, very portable. It's based on what's called a shared nothing architecture, which means that you have ClickHouse servers, they have attached storage that they control, and then they're connected on a network. This is something that is actually evolving over time to more of a uh, uh, separated storage and compute model, which is common in cloud architectures. Uh, like all analytic databases worthy of the name, it stores data in columns. And not only does it store it in columns, but it offers extremely high levels of compression. This is one of the things that allows you to scan very large amounts of data uh, when you're asking general questions that cover, for example, long time periods or a wide range of objects that you're looking at. It's very fast. The reason for that is that it's very good at parallel execution across nodes, but also using threads within cores. It uses what's called vectorized execution in cases where this is possible. This vectorized execution basically treats data as arrays, loads it onto the processor, and then uses what's called single instruction multiple data uh, instructions, which allow you, for example, to do sum or multiply on not just on a single value at once, but often in up to 8 values at once. It scales extremely well. It can operate perfectly well on your laptop, but and you can deal with hundreds of billions of rows there, but it also scales into clusters that have hundreds of nodes. In some cases, our customers, probably the largest one is about 300 or 400 nodes. And finally, it's open source. This is analytic databases have traditionally been proprietary, but ClickHouse broke the mold. It was one of the first alongside Druid to offer extremely high capabilities, but without the limitations of proprietary licensing. So as a result, ClickHouse has become the center of analytics stacks for many applications today. This is just a typical example from one of our customers that we described in a blog, GraphCDN. They provide analytics on GraphQL interfaces. So they have telemetry, which is loaded in from sources like Fastly through Kafka. It's blasted into the ClickHouse cluster, and then they have a front end based on JavaScript, specifically Next.js, which allows them both to present an API, a GraphQL API, as well as a user interface where people can do queries and also view the data graphically. So as you look at these systems, you have the ingest, you have the visualization. Those are sort of at opposite ends of this. ClickHouse is really the core. And so as a result, understanding which version of ClickHouse you're using and being very, very careful about how that version is, how you go about changing that version becomes a really critical issue. And in fact, that gets to the heart of our talk and why ClickHouse, Altinity Stable Builds for ClickHouse are so important. Our goal with these releases is to answer a number of practical questions. For example, where can I find a production-ready version of ClickHouse? So I don't want to just download any old version. When I pull this from, for example, the Ubuntu repo, I want something that's ready for deployment and will be robust and as far as possible bug-free. Another question: how do I know if it's safe to upgrade? Everybody who works with data knows that upgrade is probably the most dangerous point in the life cycle of a database. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong, so you want to be very clear that the thing you're upgrading to is well tested and you understand the consequences of the upgrade. How about bugs? How about security problems? How do you get support for those? And then to the extent that you're getting support, how long does it last? These systems that are built by analytic systems tend to have long lifetimes. Many of them last 5 or 10 years. And we see customers who, for example, are running systems that they first deployed on version 19 of ClickHouse. There were a lot of early systems adopted around 2018, 2019. Many of those systems are actually still running on older versions. So they're looking for for a variety of reasons they haven't upgraded, and they're looking to make sure that they've got support on those versions. So with that, it's a good time to introduce Altinity Stable Builds. And let's dive in and just look a little bit more closely about what these are. As you're probably aware, if you're using ClickHouse, you can go to the clickhouse.com site, and there's very simple instructions for getting builds for a wide variety of platforms. Altinity Stable Builds take a narrower view because we're trying to solve a very specific problem. What we're delivering is reliable, production-ready ClickHouse builds. At this time, we are building only on the Intel platform. Uh, we're very interested in ARM, but there's actually not enough usage in the large systems that we serve, so we're not doing ARM builds right at the moment. What we do though is we have a bunch of extra testing. We have QA suites that we run on top of the tests that already run inside ClickHouse. Another thing that we do is we test and document upgrades very carefully, because this is, as I mentioned, a really critical point in the process. The builds are certified by Altinity Support. As you may be aware, Altinity has outstanding enterprise support. We work with hundreds of customers. So we collect a lot of information as new versions of ClickHouse uh, come out. We collect feedback from users, look for bugs, so on and so forth. We'll talk a little bit more about this certification, and basically do the legwork to make sure that this is ready, really ready for use in production systems at scale. And then that support that we're offering includes 3 years of maintenance on the builds. So we can go longer. That's something you can talk to us about. But basically, once you deploy one of these builds, you know that that build is going to be supported, and we can put bug fixes into it for up for 3 years. And this is all open source. So we're not trying to create a proprietary version of ClickHouse in any way. In fact, virtually all of the work that we do on ClickHouse gets pushed into upstream. So it actually gets checked into ClickHouse. That's the standard way that we work. And then those changes come back to us through a process that you'll see shortly. But our goal is to offer these other things that make it suitable for large installations that with very high reliability and length of support requirements. So how do you install stable builds? Well, there's instructions for that. This is just a sample for Ubuntu. I won't bore you with all the details, but it's a pretty standard installation. Go get the key, set up the repo in apt, and then run your standard apt-get commands. This particular command will just grab the most recent build that's available in the repo, and then you start it using systemd. So this is a typical Ubuntu installation. Again, all documented, so you can go grab the commands out of our documentation. We also build Docker images. This, in fact, for our own purposes, is where we tend to use ClickHouse the most, because we run altinity.cloud, which has a couple hundred, well, actually hundreds of ClickHouse clusters on it. So we do a lot of work with Docker, and these are the same images that we use in our cloud. One important thing, if you're using Docker, is we do not support the Docker latest tag. The reason is that it's not considered a good practice. You really want to know what version of the container you're getting. So you'll have to give the specific build number. It's pretty easy to go find it inside Docker Hub. Another thing is, if you don't want to bother to find it, these same Altinity stable builds are available in Altinity Cloud itself. We offer both Altinity's stable builds as well as the regular ClickHouse community builds that are documented at clickhouse.com. You can run either one, but they're included by default in any Altinity.cloud account. So those are the builds. Let me just talk about a couple more things. So how do you get information about these? We have documentation out on docs.altinity.com, and in particular, there's a table which will explain exactly which builds are out there. You'll notice that we only support certain versions. These are specifically long-term support versions. And we have a calendar which shows okay, when does the community support end on these builds? How much longer does our support go? As you can see, we have a fairly long end of life for these, so they go out 3 months. And as I said, this can actually go longer in some cases. Contact us if you need help with that. So, in fact, now that we're talking about community, versus Altinity Stable Builds, why not just use Altinity's community builds? In fact, a lot of people do. And here's the link. You can go install them. But there's a couple things to know about if you are going to, be doing this. One is that ClickHouse evolves really quickly. I'll show you some stats on the next slide. And as a result, not all releases are stable. Particularly any release in ClickHouse when it comes out is going to have some number of bugs. There's often regressions. There are behavioral changes. This is probably the biggest issue. Features of SQL features change. They get better, but they force you to retest apps and to go ahead and make changes to your application before you can upgrade. The other thing is community support is limited. So we'll show you examples of that, but there are monthly releases that are supported for have fixes backported for 2-3 months. The long-term support releases maximum a year. Most real systems tend to, or sort of installed systems for SaaS or large internal systems, need software that's going to be around for years. So that's the reason why these Altinity stable builds are good to use. You can, of course, combine them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So one final note before I turn it over to Vasily to talk about the details of the builds. I just want to talk about what it means to evolve quickly. These are some numbers that show you the level of activity on ClickHouse. The little blue bars are pull requests. So you can see that these are average. These are merged PRs. The number averages at any given time around 500 per month. This is a lot of activity. And those PRs are coming from many people. So the red line is the jagged red line is actually showing you the number of unique GitHub contributors every month who are posting into ClickHouse. It's not always the same 75. In fact, over the course of a year, ClickHouse, like in 2022, got contributions from close to 400 people. So this is one of the largest database projects out on GitHub, and it's moving really quickly. What that means is it's great in the sense that ClickHouse is improving rapidly. Things like role-based access control was put in a matter of months. But at the same time, as features go in and new things are added, ClickHouse itself can become unstable. So you have regressions in some cases. You also have, as I mentioned, changes in behavior as features evolve and become better. These changes are things that you need to take into account because they may change the way that your application needs to access it. So for all these reasons, you really want something that's, if you're operating a large system, you want something that's not changing on you constantly, where we're not having to do constant upgrades. That's where the Altinity Stable Builds come in. And with that, I'm going to go to the next slide and turn this over to Vasily, who's going to talk a little bit about how releases work, how we do builds, so on and so forth, so you can understand what's going on underneath.
Thank you, Robert. Before we dive into technical details of how we actually do the releases, let's take an overview of the ClickHouse release process. Well, you can see the main branch of the ClickHouse, which received all those merges of all those PRs Robert mentioned previously, like hundreds a month, even more. And once in a while, upstream, they cut a new branch. But by the way, no, if you notice, the ClickHouse versions actually consist of the year number plus month number. So every month they cut a new branch that has latest and greatest master, and then it undergoes some sort of stabilization, like some fixes, some bug fixes, etc., etc. And once it's ready, the tag is put on some commit, and then all the artifacts like installation packages and Docker images actually push to corresponding artifactory. And since this process happens every month, not all of the versions receive the same amount of support, because, well, if you have one version every month, it takes like a lot of time and effort to support all of those equally. So regular versions receive updates for a couple of months, depending on the severity of the issue. And twice a year, upstream creates LTS version. Usually those are dedicated on those are created on March and August, hence the 22.3 and 22.8 you see here on the slide. And those receive fixes and updates for about 1 year. So 1 year is a pretty good lifespan, and for such a quickly evolving project. But what if you want to have stability? What if you want to have some features of the some new features of the ClickHouse? Well, ClickHouse guys usually advise that you should use the latest and greatest ClickHouse, but this is not, I guess, practically possible for everybody. So if you wish to have extended support, well, we have Altinity Stable Versions exactly for the same reason. So after the community has stopped, well, upstream ClickHouse has stopped update on LTS versions, we still support this for 2 more years. That means we backport features. For example, here in the graph, you can see 22.3, 22.8. Well, once 22.3 is not supported by upstream anymore, we backport features, major bug fixes from next version, like next LTS version, like 22.8 or 23.3, back to 22.3 for a couple of more years, like 2 more years, for instance. That makes about 3 years support for any LTS version. Yep. As Robert said, that you don't usually update, well, users don't usually update ClickHouse installations like every month. At best, it's updated twice a year. So, and this aligns with the community stable builds. But yeah, but sometimes you want to update less often. So how we do actually do backports? As you can see, there is like the little diagram, all the features that come to master, like represented by little dots. You can see the branch that was cut by upstream. Well, but by the way, all the commits in the ClickHouse GitHub are yellow. All commits in Altinity GitHub are blue. And so you can see at some point of time they decided to cut off a branch, stabilize it, and put a tag on that. Like, so this is how a new version is actually released. So let's for example consider version 20.8.12. At this moment of time, we actually pull all the changes to our repository without changing anything. And on top of the upstream dash 22.8, we create our own branch releases 22.8.12, because we can see that the minor version is 12 here. Also create a customizations branch. For each, in customizations branch, we made little adaptations to allow builds to run on our infrastructure, and we will talk about this a bit later. And on top of those fixes, on top of those modifications, which are not non-functional modifications to ClickHouse itself, but rather to wrapper scripts and build scripts and whatever else makes ClickHouse builds in CI/CD. On top of that, we backport some important fixes or the features either from master or from previous LTS version or whatever. We create a pre-release PR to the customization. We create PR to the customizations branch and to see that everything works nice. And once we accumulated enough customizations for once we have everything we want for the next release, we create a PR from customizations to the release branch to see how it actually goes. And once once all the checks passes, we consider that thing not to be production ready, but ready to be actually checked by our QA. So we merge pre-release PR and give the builds to our QA team. And that's during the PR process. During the PR process, well, CI/CD is executed while that builds lots of Docker images that are required for building and testing. That builds the ClickHouse itself. That runs a plethora of functional tests like functional, stateless test, stateful test, integration test, and then we just compile all those checks in one build report and proceed to the next stage, like doing a QA on the builds. So once we have like basic build report, once we have that, once we know that the build is good enough to be seen by QA team, we we will let them know, and they start doing their work. Like they at Altinity we have so basically they run multiple series of automated tests. They perform some manual testing. They sign off the build. And then, by the sign off, they create a huge report with all the checks that were performed. And once we consider that build good for production, we manually trigger the signing stage, and all the binaries appear on our Artifactory, and that also posts the images to the Docker Hub. About all the checks that we execute. Well, we have extensive suite of tests for ClickHouse. Once those were part of the ClickHouse repository, but they decided to move it out. So almost for every feature that Altinity introduced, or for any other important feature that were imported for us or our customer, we have like extensive suite of tests. If you take a look at one of our previous webinars that explain how can you create a PR to the ClickHouse, it has an explanation about all the tests that ClickHouse executes. Those tests, well, fine in itself, but they are mostly developer oriented, so that those are kind of easier to write and follow a bit like different ideologies. Well, those are tests that developed by developer alongside the features. Here we have a different approach. We kind of more formalized way. We have a specification of the functionality, which is in turn turned into very exhaustive test suite, which tests almost every aspect of that functionality from the QA perspective. And that tends to find a lot of interesting things, and well, usually fixes to those, and always fixes to those issues backported to the ClickHouse itself, and then find its way to our LTS version as well. You can see there is a list of suites, automated suites that will execute against our builds. Well, I wouldn't like spell out all of those, but well, the most interesting probably would be like LDAP and S3 and whatever else. Well, like we have it covered. And also after having run automated tests, our QA team actually does a lot of manual or semi-manual compatibility testing. They test compatibility with various client drivers like Python, ClickHouse Python driver, ClickHouse ODBC, SQL Alchemy, ClickHouse JDBC. They validate compatibility with the ClickHouse backup tool. They validate compatibility with ClickHouse Operator. They validate compatibility with the Altinity Cloud. They validate upgrade and downgrade procedures within the Altinity Cloud between the closest LTS stable versions, like, for example, between 22.8 and 22.3. They also validate compatibility with various BI tools like Grafana, Tableau, and Superset. As I said previously, all that is collected into a huge report, which is then used to decide whether or not the build is ready is it production ready? On top of that, we collect some feedback, as Robert mentioned previously, from support guys. Some of our customers run community versions, and we collect all the incompatibilities or bugs or new features or whatever might be of interest might be of interested by support team. This is compiled in the document and used to provide update notes or release notes of the new Altinity stable version.
Great. Vasily, thank you so much for for digging into the technical details. So, yeah, one thing that we want to emphasize is the amount of coverage for the QA suite is extensive. We've done a lot of work on different features, and we have thousands of test cases that run against these builds, so they're quite well tested, particularly in the areas that we've worked on. Just a little bit about when do we release the Altinity Stable Builds. So the major releases are when all tests pass, bugs are fixed, and the support team says, yes, it's ready to go. We do minor releases at intervals. They're really not that often. We're mostly concerned if there's a severe bug that's reported by a customer, particularly if it's reported by a customer, and of course, security issues that will trigger a new build. But our goal is not to respond to everything that lands in branches. For example, in an LTS branch, we want to be sort of measured in the releases because that's the way to avoid regressions. And in fact, there was a pretty significant regression that affected version 22.3 of ClickHouse during the past year. We avoided that because our release cadence is more measured, and we test stuff pretty carefully before it goes out. Just a couple notes on best practices for Altinity Stable Builds. So using stable builds and community builds together. So community builds, the builds that are coming out of the core project are great because they have new features, and you can get them literally, a few days after they actually emerge in some cases. So if you're developing systems and you're dependent on ClickHouse, new ClickHouse features, the obvious thing to do is to go grab those builds, run them on your laptop, do your development. But for the actual production deployment, then what you can do is switch to Altinity Stable Builds. If you're doing something that doesn't depend on new features, you can just use the stable builds right from the start. But most people, new systems, tend to want to get the latest and greatest. Another reason to use the ClickHouse community builds first is that if you do identify problems in the monthly builds, you can post an issue, you can post a support case with us. There's a good chance that they will already be fixed by the time that the next LTS build gets out. So this is a way of guaranteeing yourself, helping to guarantee that the next long-term support build, which we will then support, is going to have the bug fixes that you need. Another place where we have strong recommendations, and that's around upgrading ClickHouse. So again, use Altinity Stable Builds for production systems. A big reason for this is because the upgrade is very carefully tested. There's extensive notes. I'm going to give you an example in just a minute when we talk about 22.8. You want to read those notes very carefully. There's a lot of interesting material there. It is worth double checking. It's not that much, but the key things that you need to know to avoid having your application stop working are generally there. And then, of course, test the upgrade. Everybody who works with data is aware of this. One way to do it is restore a cluster from backup. This is something that Altinity.cloud automates quite nicely. Restore a cluster or restore a shard in a cluster from backup, upgrade to the new version, disconnect event streams, or excuse me, connect your event streams and your apps, ingest data. Particularly if you're running on Kafka, it's pretty easy because you can just set up the new cluster to read the same production feeds that you're using for the existing system. And then once you've checked it all out and are sure that it works, you can just discard the upgraded cluster. There are other approaches. Some people actually will go ahead and then by restoring the new version, they will actually just switch everybody over to start using that. That's another way you can do it. but there's clearly a very, very strong uh, uh, sort of testing component in this. If you're on support, we strongly recommend that you tell us about major upgrades in advance, so that we can help you decide whether there are features or bugs that you should be concerned about, um, and also so that we can be around to help you if your upgrade goes sideways. So what's next? Let's talk a little bit about the 22.8 LTS that's coming out in Altinity Stable, and hopefully in the next few days. There's a bunch of improvements. I won't bore you with all of them, but they include some really great improvements to SQL. One of the big ones that people have been waiting for a long time is what are called lightweight deletes. This is support for the SQL delete command, as opposed to alter table delete, which is previous way that it was done. This is now available as an experimental feature, and in some use cases can be used already, but it gives you an additional options when you need to quickly or make data appear to disappear quickly. There are other things in there. This is just a selection of them. Around security, a particularly big advance over 22.3 is the extension of named collections. These are basically collections of key value pairs that can include sort of login credentials for different types of systems like S3. These have been extended to cover more data sources. Um, in replication, there's the ability to insert into the system.zookeeper table. It's no longer just read-only. And then there's a bunch of improvements around cloud storage in particular. Uh, so better support for Google Cloud Storage. This has been a sore point for a while, but most of the bugs are shaken out there, and you can now safely use it through S3. There are some compatibility concerns. So if you're going to 22.8, there are definitely some things you should think about. This is exactly what you'll see in the release notes. Some very big ones here. The ordinary database type has been deprecated. This, if you are doing anything that depends on the internal structure of the way that databases are stored, you're going to want to be very careful here, because there's a new atomic database type which has the advantage that it supports commands like being able to switch tables transactionally. It allows you to do certain types of data upgrades very easily, but it has a different structure. And so this is something you want to read carefully. Your system database, which is one of the critical databases in any ClickHouse system, will automatically upgrade to the atomic database type on startup. Another one that worth highlighting is zero copy replication. This is often used when you're storing tables in S3. It is now turned off. By default, it was turned on in 22.3, so you'll want to make sure that you get that set. And speaking of S3, multi-part uploads use more threads, so they have the ability to move data faster, but then can, on the flip side, can saturate your network bandwidth. We've seen problems with that in production systems that were not prepared for that state, for that change, particularly, for example, people using systems like MinIO. And there are a number of backwards incompatible changes there that you'll need to be aware of for your applications. Have a look at the release notes. It's all there. As far as the roadmap, what are we doing next? Well, two big things. We'll be working on 23.3. We're actually going to change our procedures a little bit so that we can get the LTS releases out faster. The gap on 22.8 was longer than we would like, but there were some good reasons for it. So we'll begin working on 23.3. And then the other thing that we're working on with Stable Builds is security features. There's some new development that we're doing, which will help customers meet FedRAMP and CIS requirements. So if you have those requirements, definitely check it out and contact us to find more. We'll have more to say about this in future. We're not quite ready to do a formal announcement, but if you have requirements in these areas, please do contact us and we'd be happy to talk with you. So a little bit about support for Stable Builds. Community support, this is 100% open source. Nothing is held back. You can just go grab them, use them for any purpose that's compatible with Apache 2.0 licenses. This includes our customizations to them. And our goal is to be maximally compatible with the upstream ClickHouse. So you should be able to just move back and forth between them. If you can't, that's actually a bug. The only time that there would be major deviations typically is if there's a bug that we have fixed in an older release that never got back to, is not necessarily there in upstream because there's no place for us to put it. You can get help in the Altinity DB Slack channel. You can have the connection data for that in a bit. Um, and you can file issues against Altinity ClickHouse in GitHub. Please don't log them against the ClickHouse repo. You can check your version. You know, if you're running our builds, post the issues over to us and we'll handle them. If you're just using it as a community, you know, as a community users, we will fix things when we get around to them, unless it's a security issue, in which case we don't care where it comes from. We want to know about it and we will fix it. Enterprise support. So if you're on ClickHouse support, including running, Altinity support, including running Altinity.cloud, we're going to basically jump on problems that require bug fixes for you. We've done a number of those over the years. And the response to issues with stable builds is under SLA. So just in general, we fix, of course, bugs, security issues. We also, from time to time, backport features that are really essential for people to operate, but aren't necessarily backported in upstream. Upstream, generally speaking, only backports bug fixes. So this is something that's a little bit different. And if you have special needs or special requirements, Altinity does non-recurring engineering. In other words, we will do extra engineering work if you have new features that you need added in ClickHouse. Contact us for more information. Everything we develop in this area is done under Apache and is contributed to upstream. So just a final note on open source. We've talked a lot about stable builds. ClickHouse is obviously the core of our business and is important to everyone in the community. But we also do contributions to many other projects, such as the Altinity Kubernetes operator for ClickHouse. We maintain the Vertimedia community plugin for Grafana that has like 8 million downloads, Tableau connector for ClickHouse, ODBC driver, the Kafka Sync connector for replicating from MySQL, and many other projects besides. So you're welcome to contact us to find out about more of these. And for more information in general about Altinity Stable Builds, there's not a huge amount of information about how builds work in general. But you can check our documentation at docs.altinity.com. There's a section for stable builds. There's also a great YouTube video if you're just interested in how to build ClickHouse itself and do a PR. That was done by my colleague Vasily. And you can talk to us directly on Slack. When you get the slides, this will turn into a link to join our Slack workspace, or you can hit contact us on the website and just set up a time to discuss things person to person. So that's it for today's presentation. We've covered Altinity Stable Builds. I hope you found it, in fact, we both hope you found it useful, and we look forward to hearing from you. So with that, we'll stay on for 60 seconds or so, see if any questions pop up. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and we look forward to talking to you directly in the near future.